Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app. Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Today's executive producer is Michelle Rich. Thank you, Michelle. We couldn't have done it without you. If you'd like to become a Scary Stories NYC executive producer, just join the paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Up next, we've got multiple stories all taking place within a fairly close proximity of each other, all in Pennsylvania. This first one happened to a young romantic couple as they attempted to break away from society for a few days of heart-shaped bathtubs and champagne glass beds. They would find their efforts to find luxury and privacy thwarted by the Dogman. This is an all-new story submitted by one of you, and we've decided to call it Weekend Getaway Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this is a story about myself and my wife back before we were married. We were looking to get away for a weekend to do something different and exciting, but private and romantic. She started singing the old Beautiful Mount Airy Lodge TV commercial jingle, and we both joked about going there. After looking the place up on the internet and discovering that it was real and it still existed as a casino, we started actually considering it more seriously. It's one of those places with a heart-shaped bathtub and a bed shaped like a giant champagne glass. Really corny in a sort of Austin Powers kind of a sense. But then it dates back probably to that era or close to it. Before you knew it, we were on our way to our kitsch, romantic weekend getaway. The problem was, nobody told us we'd have to get past Dogman to arrive there. We had driven all the way out from Staten Island and the traffic had been light. Both of us were still in good moods even though we'd been driving for quite some time. We were traveling along Route 80 in that part where it treads the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey for a few miles, just before you pass through the Delaware Water Gap. It's the part of the highway named after Christopher Columbus, and to the right, you pass the Lakota Wolf Preserve. We were the only people on the highway at that point, and to be honest, it felt like our private vacation had already started. We were kissing and canoodling. My then girlfriend and current wife was driving. Let's call her Sandra, which is not her real name. Oh, I just remembered how she hates when I tell this story. Oh well, hopefully she won't be listening. Okay, we were looking at each other while driving on the highway at night, and that's not something you should be doing. See, this is why my wife does not like me talking about this. She was the driver, so I suppose she should have been the first one to notice the 8 or 9 foot tall dog-headed man that had just walked out onto the road in front of us. I screamed and pointed, and Sandra started shouting at me never to raise my voice to her. She still wasn't looking out the windshield, and that's the second reason she hates me retelling this story. Hit the brakes, I screamed, and Sandra finally noticed the large figure standing directly in our path down the highway a bit. She hit the brakes. She swerved the steering wheel. She did all she could to get out of the path of the hairy Dogman standing directly in front of us. The problem was, whichever way she turned, the Dogman walked that way too. If she adjusted to avoid hitting him, he adjusted to get back in her way. By this point, we were both screaming. We realized there was nothing either of us could do to avoid the inevitable. Wherever she aimed the front fender as we screeched to a halt, that creature was still going to be in front of us. We sped directly at the monster. I remember it had a deep gray fur coat all over, a uniform deep gray. Its nose leather was a bit darker at the end of a long snout. Although the head was canine in shape, the eyes bore an intelligence in them as they reflected the car headlights so much that they almost seemed to be lit from inside the creature's skull. I couldn't understand why something so obviously intelligent would be willing to needlessly sacrifice itself in this way. We didn't want to hit it. Why wouldn't it get out of our way? And then we braced for the moment of impact. It was going to happen no matter what we wanted to do to stop it. And as the car flew down that highway toward that immense, dog-headed man, he simply hopped up onto the front hood and jogged over us as we continued screeching to a halt. When the car stopped, the engine joined it in chugging to a complete collapse. We sat there in the middle of the highway absolutely still. I think the car lights were still on, but I'm not sure. We were both crying and my heart was beating so fast. It was the loudest thing in the world to me at that moment. We looked behind and couldn't see the monster anywhere. Sandra told me to get out and look at the engine. I asked her what the heck I knew about car engines, and she started to scream that I didn't care if she lived or died. I urged her to just wait and let the engine cool down. Then I was sure it would start again. That idea didn't satisfy her, so she popped the hood from inside and sat there glaring at me. I knew I had no choice but to go out there where the Dogman was still waiting around. I just decided to get out there and do it as fast as I could manage. The second I emerged from the passenger seat, a gust of freezing cold wind hit me, and I really regretted booking that romantic weekend getaway. I opened the car hood and looked at the engine, but like I said, I don't know anything about car engines, and this was just Sandra punishing me. Why would she be punishing me? I don't know. I guess because she wasn't watching the road when she should have been, and that's my fault. I was pretending to look at the engine, but I really was looking around me in all directions. And then I saw it. I saw the Dogman. It hadn't left. I knew it hadn't left. And there it was, staring at me, standing upright by a tree down the road and staring at me. It stood fully upright like a man. It had long, shaggy hair, but I would say the body was relatively humanoid. The next thing I noticed was that the creature was no longer standing still and staring. It had begun to walk bipedally in my direction. Panic gripped my entire body. I pressed down on that hood and almost slammed my finger in it. My entire body froze up and became unintelligent. I shivered all over so violently, it was difficult to get the hood closed and get back in the car. I got my door locked and tried to tell Sandra to drive. She was saying something, but I didn't know what. My brain wasn't functioning much better than my stuttering mouth. I think I passed out around that point. Since I'm still alive, I presume Sandra drove out of there before the Dogman ate us. I don't know the exact details because, as I said earlier, my wife doesn't really like to talk about this subject very much at all. In fact, she's never told me the rest of what happened on the night that we ran into the weekend getaway Dogman. Don't go anywhere. We've got 2 more Pennsylvania Dogman stories to tell you.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
This next one took place just a bit further west than the last one. About a 20 or 30 minute drive from the Lakota Wolf Preserve is a little street with a famously scary name, Elm Street. Only this person who wrote us didn't tell us a story about seeing Freddy Krueger. He wrote us a story about claiming to see a nightmare off Elm Street. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I grew up in the suburbs in Pennsylvania and I had 3 best friends. We can call them Manny, Mo, and Jack. We had started to drift apart a little in our teenage years when Manny got a car handed down to him through his family. We all started hanging out in and around his car and the various places it could take us, and the 4 Musketeers were back together. We were roughhousers to some extent, but we never did anything too bad, and we never got arrested or anything. We did get a bit wild, and we liked to have fun though, that was for sure. We would play jokes on each other a lot, quite often pretending that we saw a monster to try to get one or more of the others to get scared for real. So, on this one night, when Mo insisted Manny pull the car over, we all thought he was kidding around. We thought it was a prank to try to scare Manny. So, he pulls the car over and we're on the corner of Elm Street and Milford Road, which is where the 209 bus runs during the day. We would call it MILF Road, but that's only because we were idiots. There weren't any more or fewer MILFs on that block than any other. When Mo acted genuinely scared and pointed toward the trees set down away from the edge of the property across the street, I joked that it was an army of MILFs coming to get us. But then I saw that there really was someone or something down there, and I craned my neck and strained my eyes to get a better look at it. Whatever it was walking among the trees and acting weird, like its motions seemed abnormal and out of place. I'm not sure what it was doing. It was bending in odd ways. I'm not sure how to describe it better than that. I found it unsettling. It seemed insane, or maybe like something that walked in from an insane dimension. We opened the car doors and stood outside, trying to get a better view. It was scary, watching that tall thing doing whatever it was doing, but it was off so far away that it was hard to even know what or who it was. Something happened just then that made the situation one whole hell of a lot scarier. The thing darted out onto the lawn, apparently running toward us. We all jumped back into the car with the intent of speeding out of there. So, of course, the car didn't start. Time slowed down to a crawl. My friends were all freaking out, trying to shout over each other. I looked to see whose doors were locked or not, reaching up, under, over, and through each of them. I locked every door. The windows seemed sealed up too. If we had to, we could withstand a pummeling from that creature. Hopefully the car would start before that happened, but I felt a bit secure in the short term. Now, while the others continued to scream and bounce around, I watched the creature approaching us with great haste. This was an animal out of fiction. It was a monster from a myth. Its eyes glowed in an unnatural way. Its movements all seemed backward, yet sickeningly graceful. I felt as though we were witnessing a human dog, or the son of a dog. I felt nauseous at its existence. The car engine started and all other sounds melted away from my ears. I watched as, out the window, the dog-headed man-thing faded further and further back into the distance and into my past. I'm happy to say that I have not ever seen that creature again, and I hope never to. I still become frozen with complete gripping fear each time I think about the nightmare off Elm Street. Hey, you guys packed up yet? We're leaving Elm Street now and heading a bit further west for our third story of this trilogy. There are bogs over there. Miles and miles of nothing but wet nature. Plenty of space for a large land predator like the North American Dogman to call home. We have one more Pennsylvania Dogman sighting to tell you about, and it's a story we call The Cranberry Bog Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story about encountering a dogman one night on the drive home from a day spent out in nature. My girlfriend and I had gone on a tour of the Cranberry Bog Reserve that's over on Cherry Lane Road. It was really educational, but we also found it peaceful, as the bog itself was so quiet. We went in with some romantic notions about nature, but came away with the realization that nature is one big machine, eating itself over and over all day and all night. Every part of the forest eventually gets eaten by all the other parts, then is reborn and eats the others. That's doubly and triply true in swamps and bogs and wetlands. There are all kinds of animals all living off of each other in that bog. A fascinatingly weird and surreal picture was painted for us by the tour guide of a dog-eat-dog and frog-eat-frog kind of a world. We no longer felt that light elevator music sense of peace in nature. We now felt a much deeper sense of abject awe at the unending beauty and simultaneous horror of every single thing that happens in the natural world. So I suppose we were in a good philosophical state of mind that night to run into the Dogman. We sat in the parking lot after the tour, letting everyone else leave before us. We got into a conversation about the heavy feelings that had sort of been laid on us by the tour guide, and before you knew it, hours had passed, and we realized we'd better get going home. I was driving, and we were only about 2 blocks away from the parking lot itself. It had gotten dark, and there was no other traffic. To our left, as we drove away, was the natural area. Just trees and swamp and bog and water and mud and quicksand and animals eating cranberries for miles and miles and miles. I found myself feeling as though the entire forest was watching us. Or maybe I should say I felt as though everyone in the forest was watching us. I began to feel my face getting warm as though I were blushing. It was so strange how strongly I felt as though the forest were staring directly at me. My girlfriend was suddenly screaming, and I thought a spider had walked in her lap or something at first because I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary on the road. So I took my eyes off the road to look at her, only to see her staring out the front windshield with a horrified expression on her face, pointing forward. That was when I turned and saw the most incredible thing I likely will ever see. There was a dog standing there, but not just any kind of dog. This was like the Tyrannosaurus Rex of dogs. This was a large-headed monster of a dog, and it was somehow managing to walk on its hind legs. It had exited the forest and was now crossing the road. It had noticed us and was looking directly at us. Its eyes reflected back the light from our headlights incredibly brightly. The Dogman was gone into the trees on some private property across the road before we reached him, and that was the last we saw of the creature on that or any other night. I can't honestly tell you what color it was, but it was dark and monochromatic. It was tall, and it had dog-like ears on top of its head, which means it was not a Bigfoot. That's one thing my girlfriend and I both agree 100% on. This was a dog-headed, hairy humanoid. It was not a bear, and it was not a Sasquatch. We both know what we saw, and what we saw was the Cranberry Bog Dogman. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.